Hello, everybody. Okay, so this is to help you all just finish off the chapter when I'm not around. So just want to just recap where we what I basically covered in my previous lesson. So I think with regards to this, we talk about American superiority as well as the military superiority of the Americans. So like we have also discussed, there was an economic boom in the US and also in the Western European countries. I think I mentioned the idea that when the leaders started to become a bit more aggressive, they tended to say, look, we need to adapt a more confrontational attitude towards the Soviet Union. And of course, especially with this economic boom, they started to have all sorts of reforms, and at the same time go with this economic liberalization, the Marshall Plan. So because of that, because of all these economic reforms and things were doing well, they were able to renew the arms race against the Soviet Union. So like what I mentioned in the previous lesson, this had an impact, a very great impact on the Soviet economy as well. I think what we discussed was that, yes, the Americans were getting stronger, the Americans were getting richer. They even had the money to develop all these satellites in the sky and stuff like that. Later on after this, because I'm going to cut this lesson into two, I will stop after Perestroika and Glasnost, and I will give you all some time to actually watch some videos for the rest of the lesson. And at the same time, so the next lesson, we will start from the foreign policies all the way to the end of the Soviet Union or the end of the Cold War. Okay. So like what I mentioned, Ronald Reagan basically had this Star Wars program, the Strategic Defense Initiative, where he made use of satellites. And these satellites basically were able to detect, and apparently they were also able to destroy the weapons. If basically Soviet Union decided to firing weapons, the weapons could actually be destroyed by this SDI as well. Okay. But the thing is that this was so expensive and the Americans could afford it. The USSR tried so hard. They wanted to emulate it. They wanted to copy, but no money to do so. And I think, yeah, of course, with Able Archer, like what we talk about, Able Archer 83, Reagan actually changed his stance because he realized that by having something like this and being so aggressive towards the Soviet Union, he was actually putting the United States at risk as well. So he rather had peace rather than conflict, and also perhaps give that more favorable attitude towards the Soviet Union, okay, like what we talked about. Now, on the other hand, you have the Soviet Union, who was basically failing so badly because of various reasons. And of course, one of the reasons was the fact that, the command economy was so weak. How we talked about, the government actually sets prices, sets what people should be doing, basically what sector should be focused on. And even to the extent of them even deciding, right, okay, I give you this particular sector. You are to do this. They say, for example, mechanic shop, right? You want to open mechanic shop, you have to do this, and this. You can't decide what you want to do, but the state decides what you want, in that sense that the state decides what you should do. So in that sense that you have a group of generals, or rather politicians, who are deciding what you should be doing with your mechanic workshop. So in that sense there, the command economy was in a very bad shape. And also we mentioned that the command economy decided where they're going to allocate certain resources to. And what happened was that they actually allocated the resources to things that perhaps in that sense that really didn't matter much. Okay. So because of that, the Soviet Union was affected by low morale, the poor efficiency in the agricultural sector, as well as they had very bad quality in terms of its exports. Okay, all this was happening when the US basically was improving. Okay, we talked about the idea of lack of consumer goods as well, and the low quality of life, because as you can see, the resources basically were very much focused on industrialization, okay, as well as military production. Okay, so the idea of a resource allocation going to things that perhaps didn't matter, I think this is where you can see very clearly. Okay, and of course, the cost of the arms race was higher and less sustainable as compared to the American economy. We talked about the fact that US only spends 6% of its GNP. GNP refers to the gross national product. Okay, whereas this is like a budget kind of thing. So and US only spends 6, whereas USSR actually spends 16% on defense. Okay, so we also talk about the external burdens of the Soviet Union, whereby they basically were a leader of a very weak alliance, like what we mentioned previously. And basically, remember we talked about the idea of economic bartering. I trade with you what basically I want, and I give you what you want. This actually caused a lot of loss in terms of money for the Soviet Union as well. And of course, this idea of them subsidizing oil for these countries in the Warsaw Pact made them actually run into like, losses of 3 billion a year. Okay, annual subsidies, Yeah, so and also this actually led to these Eastern European nations, those satellite states of the Soviet Union, they were actually borrowing from Western banks as well. And of course, you have the external commitments, such as the Soviet-Afghan War, which eventually incurred quite a lot of debt as well. And also the resources basically were in a very bad situation also. It was very drained. Okay, and therefore, there was a lot of resistance within the communist bloc. Okay, there were a lot of pressure, okay, for the political and economic reforms. Like what I mentioned, okay, they actually had a reputation for threat and force, and they had a very poor treatment of the people who they used threat and force. Okay, so basically this was why they were saying that human rights was an issue in the Soviet Union, and therefore they shouldn't be given the favored nation status, like what Jimmy Carter was actually saying previously. Okay, and these two historical episodes, the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, the Prague Spring, which was in Czechoslovakia in 1968, okay, both were crushed by the USSR. So like I mentioned, it was because of the Soviet leadership's willingness to interfere. So this was basically the Brezhnev Doctrine in November 1968. And I just want to recap. The Brezhnev Doctrine actually states that, the Soviet Union will use force on any of their satellite states, which basically if there's any sort of like anti-communist kind of movement, the Soviet Union will step in and without hesitation will use force. That's what the Brezhnev Doctrine actually mentioned. Okay, so this was where I stopped in the previous lesson. So this was a very good summary of what was going on with regards to the Soviet economy as well as the American economy. So it was increasingly weakened. There was a declining economy. Okay, and there was a loss of support from its citizens. So this loss of support was basically people were basically trying to find out. They wanted to have more reforms. They wanted changes. Okay, in the Soviet Union. And the thing is that the Soviet Union basically, even though their people were actually not very happy and everything, they were still trying to fight the arms race thingy. Okay, with the US. They wanted to catch up with them militarily and economically. And the thing is that this actually provided, okay, like how, remember Hitler, where you had the very negative Weimar Republic leadership there, and that created a very good background for the rise of Hitler. So in this case here also, this actually gave a very, very good backdrop for a change of leadership in the Soviet Union as well. Okay, eventually, this change in leadership benefited American-Soviet relationships, ended the Cold War, but at the same time, it caused the dissolution, that means the dissolving of the Soviet Union as well. So the next few slides, or rather the slides from here all the way to the end, will give you the reasons and the factors, right, that really led to the end of the Soviet Union. These are all the contributing factors, but I mean, of course, later on you see all the internal factors, all these problematic, all the problems all start coming out all here. Okay. So this is where we move into next, where we talk about this guy called Mikhail Gorbachev. Okay, so Gorbachev basically was one of the leaders who succeeded Brezhnev. So you had Andropov, you have Chernenko. Basically, these were people who were very hardliners in the sense that they said, look, communism must be like that. Okay, you must be very firm. Okay, you must take a very harsh stance. Must be very confrontational against the US. Cannot compromise with them. So these are the kind of leaders, very hardliner kind of leaders. With Brezhnev, that kind. However, the younger leaders, when Gorbachev took office, he was only, I think, 53, if I don't remember wrongly, or just mid-50s. Okay, Okay, so young leaders like them, they actually realize, hey, look, we need to reform. Okay, this is, we cannot continue to have such harsh stance. We cannot be doing all these things that we've been doing for so many years, because the Soviet Union is actually, declining. We need to do something about it. Okay, and also they felt that it cannot always use military force for suppressing any form of opposition. So when he came into power in March 1985, 6 years of his leadership, that was the kind of mindset that he adopted. So basically, he found that there were two very, very big problems in the Soviet Union. And one of the problems was, number one, like what we talked about earlier on, the command economy being very, very inefficient, being very horrible. So because of that, he realized, okay, that was one of the biggest problems. And the second thing, we also talked about the fact that, because of this arms race, right, they were spending a lot of money on the arms race to the point that they were actually bankrupt, leading the Soviet Union to bankruptcy in that sense that. So he believed that, in order for Soviet Union to survive, you needed to, number one, revive the Soviet economy. You needed to do something in order to bring up the economy and to make Soviet Union rich again, in that sense that. So there must be something done, rather than the command economy has to change, okay. And secondly, we should stop having any form of military competition with the United States. Okay. Now, he believed that the Soviet Union should remain as it is, because he believed very, very firmly in the ideology. From the moment he actually became a leader, or rather before that, he joined the party and everything, right? All the way to the end, where he actually announced the dissolving of the Soviet Union, he always stood firmly and was very, very devoted and loyal to the Communist Party. Okay, it was just that he felt that there was a need to change, but he didn't see the need to abandon communism totally, or rather in that sense that in Soviet Union. Okay, but then again, look at what is written below in this particular slide, that the Soviet Union became a superpower only because they were a leader in the ideology, which was communism, against the idea that the Western side, capitalism, democracy, and everything. Now, if you're going to change the way communism works, if you're not going to be as hardliner as before, then the whole idea is that, well, you think it will cause the downfall of the Soviet Union? So in that sense, there, what happened was that as his policies started coming up, many people, at that point in time, people were saying, and in retrospect, when people actually were reporting, so Gorbachev actually died quite recently, about a few months back only. So all the news and everything was saying that, all his policies, right, was actually what, I quote, the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. Okay, so this was actually the first step, because he realized that, Communist Party, very tight control. We need to loosen the control first. Loosen the control of the party, loosen the control of the military, over the economic policies, over the foreign policies, okay, of the Soviet Union. So one of the problems and one of the situations that he was facing was this military-industrial complex. This actually means that, the Soviet Union generally were very focused on the idea of military, like industrial and stuff like that. There was some, in that sense, the interest is all there. Whatever interest it is, it could be, the arms race and stuff like that in that sense. So the thing is that because these people, they were very focused on this, and not only were they focused on it, the people who were focused on it were the party, okay, and also the military itself. And the thing is that, like what we actually mentioned very, very frequently, I think the last two lessons, that these resources in the Soviet Union were actually diverted to military production. So the money basically was going there, which, Gorbachev felt, actually no need, you really don't need to be doing all these things. Why are you fighting the arms race? As we talk about, let's stop the competition with the United States. Remember the second goal of his that he wanted. So what he did was he replaced all those old supporters, the hardliners, everything, right? He replaced it with his own supporters. Okay. So the thing is that if you basically replace it with people who are his supporters, they probably they won't be so strongly affected by the fact, okay, I can take it away because look, I don't support this idea. I don't like the idea of all the resources, or most of the resources going to production of military, going to production of industries and stuff. The military industries and stuff like that. So this is something that he took the first step. So let's make some changes here. And then basically he strengthened the position, and then he actually implemented a series of reforms. And I think this is something that we talked about. I mentioned these words quite frequently: glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost basically means openness, looking out for the idea of transparency, openness, let's have conversations. Perestroika, restructuring what? Restructuring the economy of the Soviet Union. Okay, now in a nutshell, what happened was that at the end of the day, right, it brought about the disintegration. That means the Soviet Union actually broke up because of these policies lah. So Glasnost, it basically means openness. This basically was, like what I mentioned, greater transparency, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So why did he do something like this? Because he felt that the only way that you can actually have change that he really had in his mind, he needed to have open discussions. Because look, if I don't have any open discussions, people will be very quiet. People wouldn't know. People wouldn't be aware of all these problems. If you have all these problems being laid out, then after that, you can actually say, okay, these are my reforms. Then people can actually speak in favor of them. And he needed opportunities for convincing the Soviets that, hey, no, this is actually necessary, because this is the situation we're facing. We need to have all these there. So the idea of openness was to discuss openly about what are some problems, and basically the fact that the government is going to do things like that, and we want your support for it. Okay. He also wanted the party and the people, you know, to see that socialism, it's not something that has a certain angle. It's always a work in progress. So this is something that he wanted to tell people about, and then communism is not a means to an end kind of a thing. Okay. So he implemented it by giving a series of debates. Debates you talk, and then you basically argue and stuff like that. So there were, Soviet censors. Censors means that you restrict certain materials and stuff like that. You restrict. So what were they restricting? These books, journals, and newspapers. Remember from Stalin's time, they did all these things. The censorship of books, journals, and newspapers, basically they tried to keep out Western ideas. Because Western ideas basically are quite anti-Soviet, right? Anti-communism. So in that sense, there when you open the mind, actually what Western ideas are all very good. So they wanted to try to keep them away from the people, so that people wouldn't feel like, it's so different. How come Soviet leadership is so horrible, but then other people are doing so well and stuff like that. So there wasn't any freedom of expression and freedom of speech in that sense there, or even freedom of ideas that could roll around. But in this case here, Gorbachev basically was introducing this, and he wanted to relax the censorship. Okay, Soviet writers were given freedom to voice their opinions. The exiled dissidents, people who were exiled away, actually were released. Okay, and they actually came back. The voices could be heard. Okay, the voices could be heard now. They basically was like, okay, we don't hold any grudge against you now, and you won't be in prison if you actually say your mind. Okay, you speak your mind and everything. So new discussions, reconstruction of Soviet history were permitted. So you see, coming from a society like ours right now, right, you can tell that you will probably be feeling, hey, it's a good thing, what, you open up everything right now, you talk about things, it's a very good thing, what. It's a good policy that he's opening up and talk, because it shows that he's willing to listen to the people. Okay, later on, right, you will see what will happen next. Why it eventually was not really the best idea. Okay. So the thing is that you see, right, the perfect picture that people actually had of the government, the Soviet life, the communist government and stuff, like, it totally went down because, like, when you start relaxing all these censorship, people out there, they actually can get information very quickly. And the thing is that people can bring in information to the Soviet Union, and people realize that, wow, you have been lying to us since the first day already. You're deprived. We are deprived by you. Other sides already. Look at how much they are in terms of the economic growth. Look at ours. Why is it so horrible? Why are we living in such a horrible mess? Why are you all doing this to us? And rather than to get people to support the government, he basically was getting people against the government now. So that was actually the very bad criticism towards Glasnost. Okay, because what happened was that these criticisms of the communist rule just basically increased, and it really went out of hand. It really, really out of hand. Okay, so going on to perestroika, again in English, it's actually restructuring. So basically they did economic reforms, political reforms. So basically you have Glasnost, right? Glasnost will open up and say, okay, we need to have all these reforms. Let's discuss about them. So perestroika was actually the reforms that basically Glasnost was talking about. So you want to discuss all these and you make all these reforms. So what happened was that he wanted to have more interest, that people have more interest in their work. So because of the interest, they actually will be able to produce better. So you know how it's like, right? If you go in and you have to do something, you are forced to do it, you don't like doing it, you just, okay, You ask me to do, I do law. Then there is no, you want me to do this, okay, law, I just do. But there's no, how you say, you won't feel that, oh, I need to meet my target law, or I need to do more than this, because actually, no matter what, I'll get the same pay, what? Because that's actually what the government will do. Today I do this, tomorrow I come back and do the same thing again. So what's the difference? It doesn't make any difference. Whereas the thing is that if they would have more ownership in what they do, they invest, they have more productivity, they will enjoy their work more and they will be able to do more for the Soviet Union, increasing the productivity and then increasing the efficiency of the economy. That's what he believes. He believed that cooperative ownership, okay, was vital to the new Soviet economy. That means you work together. It's not just about the government. They say you basically will be able to invest your own money as well in that sense. Okay, Communist Party will be rejuvenated because you allow leaders to actually carry out your own reforms. So this was, in that sense there, very simply put, in a nutshell, give people ownership of the things that they do. So because you give them this ownership of the things that they can do, they have a certain sense of belonging. Because they have a certain sense of belonging, they feel that there's a certain responsibility that they have. They will actually fulfill their role much better and with more pride in the sense there. So he basically implemented it economically. He actually permitted private ownership of small businesses. Remember, with economic liberalization in America, where private ownerships came in, this was where you basically had the money coming in. Okay. Then you have the price of goods and services that were set by enterprises themselves. Remember that now the government does not set it, the people actually set it. Factory managers were elected by the workers, control over wages were actually relaxed. State control over banking sector was decentralized. So the Soviet Union's government, the Soviet government now is trying to release the hold on all these things. But there was a major problem. These are things that Soviets never had the experience doing. Not talk about business. I want to invest my money. Do I know anything about private ownership of small businesses? And even if I do I have the money to do it? Because all along the money has been given to me by the state. I've been living off such a meager kind of very little kind of money and stuff like. Do I necessarily have the experience? Do I have the money for investment? Okay, think about that, huh? Then for political reforms, basically wanted to call for elections to candidates for local party position. So you actually have your main party, right, the central governing body, right? So in each state, you actually have your local positions, so your local party positions, call for elections. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your party bodies, right, it should be separated from your government bodies at regional level. So it should not be just the Communist Party. So anybody can also do, you see, candidates are no longer restricted to just being Communist Party members. So you can actually, your other political party members can actually be winning seats, okay, in the government, in the local party positions. Okay, so yes, there's a relaxing control over goods and services, but they retain the control over the means of production. Okay, that means say that, okay, if this I control you, I release something, but I still hold on to certain things. So you see, the owners had to pay high taxes and deal with corrupt officials, all right, to build all this. So within there, so there were still problems within the structure itself that could not be solved, all these corruption bits and stuff like that. At the end of the day, who suffers? The people still suffer, ma. See, agricultural infrastructure, roads, storage facilities remain inadequate. Okay, there was not enough of these things, no infrastructure that was available to actually help with all these businesses. Okay, and a lot of it, you see, your enterprises came out, right? As I said, your lack of experience make you actually come out with unprofitable enterprises, right? So eventually, right, the government still needed to support. You still need to pay money to help them in that sense there. And the thing is that Soviet Union, the people then, they actually lost interest in starting their own business. So long you never do already, so you're so used to having people telling you what to do. Now you want me to decide things on my own now. Not possible. So as a result of it, there was a shortage of food and other basic necessities, and it was a failure. It could not revive the Soviet Union's economy. Okay, so basically Gorbachev had intended to reform the government while maintaining a one-party system, but it led to the increased criticism of the Communist Party. Okay, so you see, right, like what I mentioned, he wanted to retain communism and at the same time make changes. But you see, as I mentioned earlier on, with Glasnost, right, people realize, wow, you'll be lying to us. Then with Perestroika, people are not very keen on doing their own business. The whole infrastructure ability is in a mess. The government never created the correct base, or should I say the correct foundations for the economic restructuring to happen. So if there are no basic foundations, then the problem will lie with the fact that even if I have keen people to do it, my foundations are not there, I can't run a business properly. I can't run the economy properly in that sense. So eventually we're still doomed to fail. Okay. All right. So for Perestroika, in terms of the political part, they opened for elections where various opposition groups basically could run for the government. So basically, there were a lot of people who were opposing people. They basically opposed Gorbachev because he felt that the policies did not the reforms did not happen very quickly, and it was just like, okay, it seemed like, what I mean by not far enough, it seems like, oh, I'm just giving you a little bit of things only, you know, like okay lah, I give you like a token sum, that kind of thing. Everything else, you know, it doesn't really yeah lah, actually it still seems like we are holding on to everything. The government's holding on to everything. I'm just giving you little bits of pieces to show that I am making an effort for change. So people felt that way. Okay. So this guy called Boris Yeltsin, who was actually one of those people who was sacked from the Communist Party, now was the head of this new opposition government, opposition party called the Congress of People's Deputies. So this Boris Yeltsin eventually, who is this guy? Boris Yeltsin eventually took over Gorbachev's place when Gorbachev stepped down. So with Glasnost, criticism and growing resentment of the communist government surfaced. So that's why I told you at the beginning. So this is a summary slide. The political effect of Perestroika further undermined Gorbachev's authority within Soviet Union. So it basically made people question his leadership even more. Okay, and eventually there were a lot of there were possibilities of political revolutions around the Soviet Union and also within the satellite states itself. So for this lesson, I'll stop here, and basically you can go to your Google Classrooms, and some of you, I have your what do I call it? I have your Google Classrooms of your, you have access to all this information as well. Okay, Ken? So if there's anything, just drop me. So for today, basically just finish off the slide, look through, finish off the slides, watch the videos, and you know, just basically, you know, if you have any questions, all for slides for the foreign policies all the way to the end of the Cold War. All right, so till then, bye.